Welcome to today's episode of the podcast. I am thrilled that you're here. Hey, I had this happen today and I had to jump on and record this right away because it was such a good reminder. And so it may be something that's helpful for you as well. So I was attending a training with one of the coaches that I have and she's a very successful business owner. I would say she's high seven figures, maybe low eight figures at this point, teaching her version of signature frameworks. And was slightly different, but it was fascinating to me because I was listening to her and it's a multi-day training that she's doing and so I love listening into this kind of stuff. Anyway, she started talking about signature frameworks and how to put them together and what to look at. And I will tell you that one of the things that I struggle the most in her program is that I feel like I'm not exactly sure where I am on the path, right? You've heard me talk about the customer journey and how important it is to be really transparent about that signature pathway for your customers so they know exactly where they are. They know how they're getting from point A to point B, and you're showing them the steps for them to get there, right? It's like when you're driving across country, you don't just jump in the car and go. Even if somebody in your ear is saying, turn here, do this, go to this town, do this stuff, right? You still want to have the map, right? Adults like to see the big picture. They like to know what is happening. It builds trust, it builds transparency, and it builds confidence that not only do you have what they need, but that they believe that they can do what they need to do to get from point A to point B. I've been in her experience for a while. And one of the biggest things is like, where am I? And she's doing this training and she's doing that training and she's introducing this and she's introducing that. And she's all always present, right? She's always doing some type of training. The challenge is I call it random acts of training, right? Because I show up and I'm like, this is super interesting and super helpful and I could apply this. But what happens is have lost the big picture. And so anyway, so she's teaching about how to think about your signature framework, how to create it, how to take your genius and really build the foundation that helps your customers go from where they are today to where they want to go. All of that's great. All of that is exactly on point for how I would describe what somebody needs in order to really have a strong foundation for their business. What was interesting, however, is that she was teaching people how to reverse engineer the whole process. So she was starting with the detail and then helping people use AI to have AI create the bigger picture based on all the detail that they have used. And I thought it was fascinating, not because it's the wrong approach, but I thought it was fascinating because when she finally revealed that this is the way that she was doing it, I thought, huh, that is fascinating. So she took her expertise and what she focused on in terms of, she calls them her authority codes. And so taking her sort of intellectual property that she's created around these different topics that she is an expert in or she's developed an expertise in, what she was saying was take all of those and then see what happens, see how the big picture starts to formulate, and then create a big picture around all of these things that you've created, which is fascinating, right? So it's really reverse engineering the process. So if you're a detailed person and you are in the weeds, this may help you get out of the weeds and see what you're doing from a 10,000-foot view. So it's not necessarily the wrong activity. The challenge is that very easily you lose sight of the customer, right? Because really the whole thing is really about the customer's journey from point A to point B. And you've defined that you are the expert to help that customer go from point A to point B. So it's really about the person that you're helping and the journey that they're taking to get to that result, regardless if you're doing it for them or they're doing it themselves. And so I would argue that you start with the customer. You identify your ideal customer, you identify that ideal customer's biggest problem and the result that they are searching for, right? What's that transformation that they want? What's on the other side of that problem? That becomes your signature pathway, right? You're the bridge from that problem to that solution. And then everything inside of that is the progression or the pathway or the steps that you take them to go from that problem to that solution. That's where your expertise comes into play. So it's really not about packaging all of the random things that you've done and hope that there's an overarching sort of theme to it. It's really looking at it from that customer's point of view and then connecting how you can best deliver that step to them so that they can keep moving forward. So I thought it was fascinating because so often I get one or two sort of ways that people think of this. One is, oh, it's so easy. I already know what my thing is. Great. Most of the time, you have an idea of kind of that through line, that pathway that you create for people. And maybe you've been testing it over time, right? I mostly work with people who have established businesses. And so they have some sort of method to the madness of how they do things. So it's a little bit easier for them to identify what that looks like. But if you are in that place where you're just like, I do all these things and some of them are connected, some of them aren't. I don't really know how I do what I do. Most of the time, it's just like I pick a topic and I go with it, or I create an offer and I run with it. And then you end up with lots of offers, lots of ideas, lots of ways you're helping people, but not one cohesive pathway. And so I'm just fascinated because I this again, this just happened today. I really wanna reach out to her and just be like, "You know that there's an easier way than sort of this approach of trying to find out what your genius is based on all of the random things that you've done." I bring this up for that, right? If this is something that you're struggling with, if you are weeds and then you get back to the big picture kind of person, great. That may help you identify what it is that you're doing and all the parts and pieces and see if you can find that 10,000-foot view. Or if you're like, okay, so I feel like I have the big picture, I have all the parts and pieces that fit in there. I'm not sure the order, I'm not sure how that all works. Go back and look at your ideal avatar and put them on the path and what's the way, the best way that they need to go through that so they can get through it easier and faster and better, right? That's why they hire you is for your experience. So you're kind of putting your little character on the path and looking at it from that perspective. That will help you simplify and get yourself out of the sort of random acts of training, random acts of unconnected offers, right? And if none of that works, give me a shout because again, this is my superpower. This is what I do every single day for people is to help them sort of take it out of their head and put it into a structure that really is simplified for themselves, for their business, for their team, and most importantly, their customers. Because here's what happens. Here's the second thing I want to say about this is that and I'm seeing it in her program, which is why I'm mentioning it, but what happens is when I go to the training, I'm like, this training is great. This is super valuable. All the AI stuff she's giving us is super valuable. There's all sorts of value that's happening, but at the end of the day, it's not connected. And so I keep saying, okay, this is great. And then I do that, and then I do this activity, and then I do this other activity. And I'm like, all this is really great, but I don't know how they're all connecting. I've lost the plot. And so when she said that today, I was like, "Of course I have," because she's not thinking about it as the journey that I'm going on. So what happens with that traditionally is that then people don't ascend. People don't continue in your world because they're like, "This is all great, and I'm taking up a lot of time doing all of these things, but I'm not getting closer to my goal because I must be doing something wrong, or I must be missing something, or I must need this other thing." And while that's great for initial ascension, right? Somebody may say, oh, I need to be in her inner circle so I get more information or I get more of what it is I should be doing. But what happens is it leaves that bad taste in people's mouths, right? Because they're like, okay, I joined this and it's not any different. I joined this other thing and it's not any different because the piece that's missing is the game board, the map, the pathway. These are the things that I've been talking about on the podcast for a while now, but that's what's missing. And so if I can see myself in the journey and I can see how this training relates to where I am on the journey and I stay focused on my personalized journey, then I'm going to get to my finish line and then I'm going to ascend. Then I am going to keep working with this woman and she is going to help me go to the moon. But if she doesn't capture where I am at the time that I am there and help scooch me forward on my path, then I am not gonna continue working with her because she's lost the plot for me, right? She has her various things that she's doing, and she's making a lot of noise, and she's doing a lot of random acts of training, which are great, but they're not aligned to my path. And that is the difference between somebody who comes into a program or comes into some sort of experience and someone who stays. So it's a really fine line, but from your perspective as a business owner, from your perspective as an architect of how you create this experience for your customers, that the more you can dial in the customer journey, the better off you're gonna be because that's when you can really become scalable. When everybody can drop in wherever they are at the right place and go on their path to get to the result. But if it's just like this like noise, 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 it's like marketing, right? If you're just marketing by showing up and making noise, people will see you, people will attend, but they're not actually going to take the action that you want them to take. They're not going to get those results. They're not going to get to the goal or the transformation that you've promised. They may have some wins, but they're not going to get to the goal. They're not going to continue to ascend with you because they don't know how to get there. And you'll see it in a couple different ways. One, you'll have turnover. People will leave because they're like, this is great, but it's a lot of time and I'm still not doing anything. You're gonna have another group of people who want your time and attention, and then you're gonna meet with them potentially one-on-one or in a group, and they're gonna continuously be asking you the same questions, and they're not gonna continue forward on their path. As an expert, this is very maddening for all experts, right? When you've answered the same questions 12 times and people aren't taking action. They're not taking action not because they don't want to, but because they don't see the clear path forward, right? If you give them the game board and a pair of dice, they know how to play the game. But if you're not giving them those things, then they're either waiting for it or they're gonna say, "I don't get it," and then you have to repeat yourself, right? Which is what you don't wanna do. Or they'll ascend and then just not actually do anything, which then distracts the other people who are doing things. So when you do this, it's so important to get that 10,000-foot view correct. So whether you come from the bottom up or you go from the top down, it's really recognizing that it's probably actually somewhere in the middle, right? But it's really looking and starting with who your ideal customer is and then building their journey. That is where it starts, and that's where if you can stay focused on the journey that person has, that is when you really start to transform your business. If you love this episode, give me a shout. I would love to hear what your thoughts are on this and whether or not you've been in any of these experiences, right? Either the random acts of training where you feel like you're getting lots and lots of stuff, but nothing that's leading you directly down a path, or a really great experience where you feel completely supported and you're able to go from point A to point B very, very quickly and with purpose and with all of the support that you needed. Either one, I would love to hear about it. All right, until next time.